911, where's your emergency?
Is a robber at a pawn shop.
Where's the robber? Where is he?
He's right here right now. I ran very fast with my baby sister. I just didn't want to be killed.
In 2013, in the tranquil town of Danville, Kentucky, Andrew Hawkinsmith lived a contented life alongside his father, Michael, his mother, Angie, and his 13-month-old sister, Naomi. The bond between Michael and Angie began as a classic tale of love at first sight, rooted deeply in shared values and a strong commitment to their Christian faith. Michael served as a part-time youth pastor, and both he and Angie were active, well-respected members of their local church community. However, the modest income from his pastoral duties proved insufficient to fully support their growing family. Seeking additional financial stability, Michael turned to a trusted acquaintance within the church, Pastor Allen Keith. Pastor Keith was a prominent religious figure in the region, known for delivering sermons across mobile congregations. Beyond his spiritual leadership, he maintained an unconventional side business, owning and operating a chain of pawn shops. It was through this unusual blend of ministry and commerce that Pastor Keith presented Michael with a compelling opportunity.
Usually, pastors and pawn shops don't necessarily go together.
He was buying precious metals, videos, and CDs and things.
Between that and the Bible, that was his life.
Pastor Allen Keith was a devout man known for preaching the Word of God every Sunday across Pulaski County. However, alongside his spiritual devotion, he also harbored a deep appreciation for wealth, particularly gold. His dual passions converged in his business ventures, where he owned and operated a pawn shop chain known as ABC Gold Games and more. Under Pastor Keith's mentorship, Michael Hawkinsmith soon became involved in the business himself. He began working at the pawn shop, and with the new job providing financial security alongside the recent birth of baby Naomi, life seemed to be on an upward path for the Hawkinsmith family. Michael and Angie found joy in raising their children and made the deliberate decision to homeschool their son, Andrew, allowing the family to remain close-knit even during the day. Each morning, the entire family, Michael, Angie, Andrew, and little Naomi, would gather at the pawn shop, turning it into a unique blend of workplace and home.
The pawn shop, that was basically my home. We had all the knickknacks of a pawn shop, from like games to movies to all sorts of junk. It was basically a playground. I absolutely loved it. It was simply amazing.
But their peaceful routine was shattered on the morning of September 20th, 2013. At precisely 9:17 a.m., a 911 dispatcher in Kentucky answered a call. On the other end of the line was a young boy, his voice quiet but urgent, reporting a robbery in progress at a Danville pawn shop.
911, where's your emergency?
Is a robber at a pawn shop.
The innocence of the voice masked the horror that was unfolding. 9-year-old Andrew Hawkinsmith remained on the line, his voice trembling as he pleaded with the 911 operator for help. As the dispatcher calmly tried to gather critical information, another sound broke through the tension. The soft but unmistakable cry of a baby. It was Naomi.
Where's the robber? Where is he?
He's right here right now.
Both Andrew and his infant sister were forced to remain as silent as possible, knowing that any noise could reveal their hiding place to the intruder, still inside the pawn shop.
Come here quickly, because I'm afraid. Please hurry.
Okay, they're coming, okay?
Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the dispatcher immediately dispatched patrol units to the scene, while keeping Andrew on the line, offering reassurance to the frightened child. Within just 6 minutes, officers arrived at ABC Gold Games and more. With no idea what horrors awaited them inside, they approached the storefront with caution. The front door was locked, leaving no time for negotiation. Acting swiftly, authorities shattered the glass and forced entry, bracing themselves for whatever they might encounter within.
As I made entry, all I was thinking about was, is the shooter still here? The first thing that I noticed was a huge smear of blood to my right in the lobby area of the store.
I don't care how many times you've done it or seen it, There's nothing that truly prepares you for this.
Officers' worst fears are confirmed the moment they enter the pawn shop. Inside, 3 lifeless bodies lie sprawled across the floor. With no immediate indication of whether the gunman remains on the premises, officers urgently clear the building, searching for the young caller who had led them there. Following directions from the 911 dispatcher, they locate the 2 children, Andrew and baby Naomi, still hidden in their makeshift shelter. Both are visibly shaken, but miraculously unharmed. They are swiftly escorted to safety and taken to the police station, where trained personnel begin the delicate process of comforting and interviewing the traumatized siblings. Meanwhile, the pawn shop is flooded with law enforcement personnel. Detectives begin documenting the scene, while a forensic team begins their grim task of examining the victims. The nature of the store complicates the investigation. Firearms, ammunition, and valuables are scattered throughout, making it difficult to distinguish forensic evidence from merchandise. The first victim, a woman, is found near the cash register. A second victim, a man, lies just beyond the counter. A trail of blood leads investigators to the third body, another male, discovered at the rear of the store. Each victim's position and injuries begin to paint a clearer picture of the violent events that unfolded, but the motive and identity of the killer remain chillingly unclear.
One of the bodies had been moved to a location where if someone peered into the front door, they wouldn't be able to see that body.
The victims had been shot multiple times, possibly after they were down. The only thing at that time that we could determine was that the spent casings appeared to be from a .22 caliber weapon.
As word of the tragedy spread, Andrew's grandmothers, Charlene and Barbara, rushed to the scene, desperate for answers. From behind a line of police cars and yellow tape, they were stopped by officers as the investigation unfolded inside.
And the policeman would not let us up to the shop. They said, "You cannot go in." Well, I just broke down at that point. I knew they were gone. And my heart just sunk. Just couldn't understand why. What had they done so bad that they deserved to die? Would not comprehend why anyone in their right mind would want to hurt either one of them.
The first 2 victims were quickly identified as Michael and Angie Hawkinsmith, owners of the pawn shop and loving parents to Andrew and Naomi. The third was 60-year-old Dan Smith, a regular customer known for buying and selling gold. At first, it appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. The pawn shop, filled with valuables, seemed a likely target. But one key piece of evidence didn't fit the theory, suggesting this was far more than just a random crime. Dan Smith's suitcase, found open on the counter, remained untouched, still filled with cash. The store's register also held money. The fact that neither was taken immediately cast doubt on the theory of a robbery gone wrong. Why would a thief leave behind such obvious valuables?
As I continued to process the scene, I discovered that over $1,000 from the cash register was still there. It hadn't been taken. Both Mike and Dan's wallets hadn't been taken. It made me start to think that the victims had been targeted for a reason other than robbery.
Detectives grew increasingly puzzled by the scene. If theft wasn't the motive, what was? Could one or more of the victims have been specifically targeted?
We're like, what do we have here? It was a hit. Was it on Dan Smith?
Dan Smith was a gold buyer. He carries a briefcase with him with a large amount of cash.
Dan Smith's wife was able to tell us that he would do a certain route on certain days of the week. So he goes to his bank, he gets the money, and then he had a lot of pawn shops that he went to.
Investigators turned their attention to Dan Smith's usual routine, visiting Lawson's Jewelers in Harrodsburg, a stop just 19 minutes from the Hawkinsmith pawn shop.
He walks in with that same briefcase and then talks to the lady behind the counter and just appears very relaxed, laughing, has no idea, obviously, where he's headed. I don't even think it was a full hour after this. Dan Smith was killed.
There was nobody that appeared to be paying any particular attention to him. There was nothing that stood out.
We really were kind of baffled at this point. Who was even the target?
However, their initial focus on Dan yielded no new leads. None of the victims appeared to have known enemies, and the investigation stalled. With no suspects and no clear motive, the case grew colder. Meanwhile, grief swept through the Hawkinsmith and Smith families. News of the triple homicide spread quickly, shocking the tight-knit community in neighboring towns. In a place where violence was rare, the brutal nature of the crime left residents stunned and searching for answers.
2 young children are without their parents tonight after they were murdered inside their Danville, Kentucky pawn shop. That store is located just blocks from Center College. As Matt McCutcheon reports, one of the kids called 911 and shielded his sister from the violence.
The town of Danville, shaken by the brutal murders, demands answers. Even Pastor Allen Keith, the man who first introduced Michael Hawkinsmith to the pawn business, publicly expresses his grief. In a heartfelt message shared on social media, he writes, "No sleep at all. I am in shock right now over the loss of 3 great people. I also knew the third man. He was a business client and a good friend."
We're now learning that the suspect in this case, apparently police say, made his way out of this garage door and then took off through the alley, never to be seen from again.
If you have any information, call Danville Police at the number now on your screen.
As authorities work urgently to track down the killer, they face a troubling reality. There is still no clear motive, no specific suspect, and no sense of why the victims were targeted. With so much unknown, there remains a chilling concern that young Andrew could still be in danger. In the meantime, both Andrew and his infant sister Naomi are under protective care at the police station. Plans are made for their transfer into the custody of their grandparents while the entire community struggles to comprehend who would commit such a senseless act. Just as investigators begin to run out of leads, a new call comes in, offering a potential breakthrough in the case. The case takes a dramatic turn when a tipster calls in with a critical lead.
I'd gotten on Facebook and noticed, homicides in Danville, Kentucky pawn shop. And immediately my heart sunk because I thought a friend of mine still owned that shop, Allen Keith. So that's when I called him. Immediately as soon as I started talking to him, it was an odd conversation.
Once Kenneth Allen's name was mentioned, we started looking, okay, who is this guy?
He was involved in the pawn shop business. He had one in Somerset, Kentucky. And he was a pastor of a small town church in Pulaski County, Kentucky. He appeared to be loved by his local congregation.
That was kind of a common denominator for everybody involved, as they were all heavily into the church, either as pastors, ministers, leaders, just in a church.
Brother Harold, he said, I feel horrible because he said, I got Mike Hawkinsmith into the pawn business.
The caller claims that his friend, Pastor Kenneth Allen Keith, had made unsettling remarks about the murders. Keith, who lived in Somerset, about 50 minutes from Danville, was in town on the day of the killings, allegedly to pick up a prescription for his wife at a local pharmacy he rarely visited.
I said, "You were in Danville?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "I was in Danville to pick up my wife's prescriptions."
Alan's given us detailed, step-by-step description of where he was that day.
Now I'm freaking out because I'm thinking, why are you telling me this? So pretty much Michael and Angela were innocent bystanders. And then he said they weren't innocent. They cost me a lot of money.
Investigators begin to scrutinize Pastor Keith's background. As they examine his financial history, they uncover a significant detail. Keith had once been the sole owner of ABC Gold Games and more. However, due to mounting debts and financial instability, he had been forced to hand over ownership of the business to Michael and Angie Hawkinsmith.
Kenneth felt cheated. He felt that that pawn shop should have been his. And that Hawkinsmith basically stole it right out underneath his feet.
Suddenly, a possible motive emerges: resentment, financial strain, and a loss of control. But there's a potential obstacle. Keith claimed he was at the pharmacy around the time of the murders. If his alibi held, he could be cleared of suspicion entirely.
So
I was in Danville, but I was at the pharmacy. I'm standing in the pharmacy while all this happened.
We immediately dispatched investigators to retrieve the video from the pharmacy where he alleged that he had picked up the prescriptions for his wife.
If he was in there during the time of the shooting, then he wouldn't have been a suspect.
Surveillance footage from the pharmacy confirms that Pastor Keith was there, captured on camera at 9:24 a.m. However, this detail raises more concern than relief. The 911 call reporting the murders came in at 9:17 a.m., just 8 minutes earlier. The timeline now suggests something chilling. Pastor Keith could have committed the murders and still made it to the pharmacy in time to establish a false alibi. It appeared impossible for someone to be in two places at once. Pastor Keith's appearance at the pharmacy at 9:24 a.m. cast serious doubt on his involvement, threatening to derail the investigation entirely. But detectives knew there was still one person who might hold the truth: 9-year-old Andrew Hawkinsmith, the brave young survivor who had called 911 that morning. If Andrew could recall any detail confirming that Pastor Keith was at the pawn shop during the murders, it could shatter the alibi and put the case back on track.
What happened today earlier before you and I met?
Yes. Anyways. And that reminds me of the dead people.
According to Andrew, September 20 began like any other morning. The Hawkinsmith family arrived at ABC Gold Games and More and opened the shop at 9 a.m. As his parents prepared for the business day, Andrew sat in a corner quietly playing a video game. Soon after, a familiar figure walked through the door. Dan Smith, the gold man, a regular customer known for his friendly visits and gold trading. While Michael chatted with Dan near the counter, Angie stood nearby, gently rocking baby Naomi in her arms. Everything seemed routine until the peace was shattered by what came next. What began as a normal morning quickly turned into a nightmare. After a calm exchange between Michael and Dan, Andrew lost interest and returned to playing a game, part of his usual routine between study sessions with his mom.
Shortly after, this guy, he came in as well, and I was like, he's kind of weird looking. He starts to pull out a gun and kind of raises his voice and says, "Get on the ground." And we all did because we was petrified.
But soon, Andrew, Angie, and baby Naomi were crouched in a corner, hiding in fear. From their spot, they watched in horror as a man opened fire, 8 shots ringing out. To Andrew, the sounds resembled darts, but he was unknowingly witnessing his father's final moments. The gunman then turned to Dan.
Dad was like, "Please stop." He started rolling around until he wasn't. He stopped.
Realizing they were next, Angie made a final, heroic decision. With no time to spare, she guided her children to the only hiding spot left, risking her life to save theirs.
My mom, she told me to go in the back with my sister. I crawl all the way back to the office. I sit my sister on the couch. I'm sitting right beside her.
Now concealed in the office, Andrew hears 4 additional gunshots, followed by an unsettling silence. A few tense moments pass. Though terrified, he knows he must check on his parents. Stepping out cautiously, he is met with a devastating scene.
I remember crawling over to the doorway and seeing that my mom was just laying there with a puddle of blood.
Realizing that he and baby Naomi appeared to be the only survivors, Andrew returns to the office, shaken but determined to protect his sister. With Naomi's safety now his only focus, he quickly grabs the office phone and calls 911, hoping for help before the intruder discovers their location.
A 9-year-old boy called 911 saying his family had been killed. What the little boy did before that is simply heartbreaking.
He grabbed his little sister up and he carried her in the office, and and he covered her with his body. And,
Okay.
it's just,
Yeah, you still do the interview.
he's a hero.
He and his 14-month-old sister were not physically hurt.
I ran very fast with my baby sister. I just didn't want to be killed.
Andrew's courage, presence of mind, and detailed recollection of events become instrumental in the investigation. His testimony casts doubt on Pastor Keith's alibi, allowing detectives to re-examine the case with renewed clarity. Suddenly, the previously scattered clues fall into place, including the identification of Pastor Keith's silver minivan, matching the vehicle seen near the crime scene. With this critical link, the case against him begins to solidify. Just before and shortly after the shooting, a security camera captured footage of a silver vehicle matching Pastor Keith's minivan circling the pawn shop. Thanks to the precise timestamp provided by Andrew's 911 call, investigators confirmed that Keith had enough time to commit the murders and still appear at the pharmacy minutes later, shattering the credibility of his alibi. Without this crucial detail, he may have walked free. On October 9, 2013, 19 days after the murders, authorities secured 3 warrants, one for Pastor Keith's home, another for his church, and a third for his pawn shop in Somerset.
An investigator went in as a potential customer and made contact with Mr. Allen.
We discovered a box for a threaded device that can be purchased over the internet that can be fashioned into a makeshift silencer.
During the searches, investigators found evidence confirming the use of a silencer during the attack, which explained Andrew's initial description of the gunfire as sounding like darts.
And then also outside of the business, we found spent 22 shell casings and then a target that had been shot. So we believe that he was practicing prior to the shooting.
The 22 casings found in Kenneth Keith's pawn shop matched all the expended shell casings from the murder scene in Danville, Kentucky. They were shot from the identical weapon.
Pastor Keith was arrested without resistance inside his own shop. For the families of Michael and Angie Hawkinsmith and Dan Smith, it was a moment of bittersweet relief. The man they once trusted had betrayed them in the worst possible way, but justice had finally been served.
But to be able to commit murders on Friday and then get up on the pulpit Sunday morning and preach, especially in front of 2 children, you're going, wait a minute, that's not a real pastor.
To spare Andrew, his sister, and the victims' families the trauma of a lengthy trial, prosecutors offered Pastor Keith a plea deal: life in prison without the possibility of parole in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. As the courts moved forward with sentencing, Andrew began to find a way to process his grief. Through art, he began to heal. He poured his emotions into drawing, channeling his pain and resilience into the pages of a comic book. Despite the horror he had endured, Andrew had saved his sister and shown extraordinary courage. On that tragic day, he embodied the strength and selflessness his parents had always shown him.
My dad, he made things look so easy. He was truly an amazing person.
Though Michael and Angie Hawkinsmith lost their lives, their final act was one of love, protecting their children above all else. On May 26, 2017, Andrew's 13th birthday, Pastor Keith was formally sentenced to life without parole. His betrayal, driven by greed and resentment, would never harm another soul again. Allied by a supportive and loving family, Andrew has begun a new chapter in life. Recently engaged, he carries with him the unbreakable bond of his parents' love, a guiding light that no tragedy can ever erase.
I've been told you're a spitting image of your dad. You look just like him. You act just like him. Naomi, she looks just like my mom. I'm very thankful for what I have. And in a sense, it's like I am living through my parents' life. My parents will always live on within me.
Do you think Pastor Keith's dual identity as a preacher and pawn shop owner was a red flag that went unnoticed for too long?
They have time in Andrew's bed are set a point steady o lasts, transponing mile and go with. I mean, I love the purpose in the set was into the stage of the IOFO and the IONs and the IDIOs that. What would you have done in Andrew's place, just 9 years old, hiding in silence to protect your baby sister?
If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life crime stories that deserve to be heard. And tell us in the comments what part of this case shocked you the most.